statutes and the rules regarding capital improvement elements and comprehensive plans, and also how they intertwine. Next, please. So also known as CIEs and comp plans, I'm sure you all know the drill, but as a brief refresher, a comp plan is a long-term plan, typically 20 years out, that includes required elements such as needs and opportunities and broadband, and can also include other elements that are sometimes optional based on the community, such as housing and transportation. This plan should illustrate the direction in which you want your community to go. A capital improvement element, or CIE, is technically a part of the comp plan, but is reviewed separately. Once a community adopts a DCA approved CIE, they can begin collecting impact fees in accordance with their CIE, and also must submit an annual CIE update to DCA for review separately from the comp plan. CIEs and comp plans are both regulated by statutes in order to provide for better consistency and coordination between local governments when planning. The state of Georgia has passed laws and rules to guide communities in the preparation of their plans, including the Georgia Planning Act and the Development Impact Fee Act. Next, please. So regarding statutes, the Georgia Planning Act was passed in 1989 and is the foundation for community and regional planning in the state. It gives the local governments the power to plan and DCA its authority. Next, please. The DCA minimum standards, or comp plan rules, as they are sometimes referred to, are the formal regulations guiding the community planning process in Georgia. They are intended to ensure that local comprehensive plans embody the articulated will of the community and provide the foundation for all decision-making by local government officials and other community leaders. They provide details about the required components of comprehensive plans and the process for their creation and adoption. The minimum standards specifically include the required and optional plan elements, procedural requirements, and definitions. One of the plan elements the minimum standards discuss is the capital improvements element, which is required for any government that charges impact fees. Next, please. So the Development Impact Fee Act, or DIFA, regulates the implementation and collection of development impact fees. It provides local governments the power to establish an impact fee program if it follows a specific process, which you'll hear more about in a few minutes. DIFA promotes orderly growth and development by establishing uniform standards by which municipalities and counties may require that new growth and development pay a proportionate share of the cost of new public facilities, which would be needed to serve the new growth and development. DIFA also directs DCA to establish the minimum standards for CIEs and the process local governments must follow in preparing and adopting them. It also provides specifications for development impact fee ordinances by municipalities and counties that local governments must follow. But note that DCA does not review, approve, or even receive these ordinances, as they are purely local in nature. DIFA requires local governments wishing to impose development impact fees to adopt a comprehensive plan which meets the aforementioned minimum standards and which contains the additional planning components outlined in the DCA Impact Fee Rules. Next, please. So unlike the Pirate Code, these rules are not guidelines and are meant to be followed. The impact fee rules detail the additional comprehensive plan components and processes required under the Development Impact Fee Act. They describe the requirements for the CIE of the comprehensive plan, that all communities intending to pass a local development impact fee ordinance must first assemble and adopt. The rules also explain the required annual CIE update. These rules were last updated in 1997. So that is 6 sets of comprehensive planning standards ago. So as a result, there are a few inconsistencies between the impact fee rules and the comp planning rules. DCA had just taken the first step toward updating the impact fee rules by assembling a working group of local and private sector practitioners with tons of impact fee experience when COVID became a thing. So we've been a bit in a holding pattern on that for a while, but we hope to pick that up again later this year or in early 2022. Next, please. So I say all that to say that while these are all separate documents with specific purposes, everything is connected. The Georgia Planning Act is what gives us the power to plan. A capital improvement element is a required comp plan element for communities that wish to collect impact fees on top of having a comp plan that meets the DCA minimum standards as required by DIFA. And DIFA and the impact fee rules help sort out the creation and implementation of CIEs. Next, please. So in closing, I'm going to cover a few of the most common questions we receive regarding CIEs. Starting with the impact fee rules say that I have to update my entire work program annually. I don't think that's actually happening in my community. What's up with that? So over a decade ago, DCA leadership determined that all we would look for when reviewing the required annual CIE updates were the annual financial report, which is basically we make sure you're balancing your checkbook properly, and the schedule of improvements, or the part of the document that provides an ongoing project list for projects funded by impact fees. You can merge the schedule of improvements and the work program information into one component if you want to, rather than continuing to break it into separate components. But all we're really interested in seeing in the annual CIE update are the projects funded by impact fees. And I'm sure you're thinking that that's not what the rules say, which is exactly why we need to update the rules. Let me see. The population data our original CIE is based upon is like 20 years old. Why are we basing our future needs upon these old numbers? That is a great question. Why are you doing that? The original intent was that the CIEs undergirding the impact fee programs would be updated every 10 years, just like the rest of the comp plan. That would provide an opportunity to adjust growth rates and any assumptions based upon them. However, that's not explicit in either the impact fee rules or the comp plan rules. Again, hence the need for the update. So unfortunately, many communities' programs are based on incredibly outdated population data. So if that's the case in your community, then you should address that. We can add or remove projects to our list every year, right? And DCA will make sure that we did it right? No, not right. DCA is not the impact fee police. We are not reviewing your annual updates at that level of detail, but any developer or other fee payer that's forking over cash might be. Your initial CIE provided a 20-year list of projects based upon the growth rates that were present at the time. As the years move on, some projects will cycle off of your list once they're complete, and new projects from that CIE will cycle on as they are ready for implementation. Just adding new projects as you go that you believe have become necessary is questionable. At a minimum, you need to make sure that the cost sharing calculations match those used when the original CIE was adopted. But it's questionable whether or not you can just add new projects to the impact fee list that were not a part of the original plan. And Bill may be able to provide more information on that later on. Additionally, we are not actively policing your project list to make sure that every item on your list is an allowable capital improvement. If something is obvious, like say you're buying bullets for your police officer sidearms, and the reviewer happens to notice that, we are going to likely make an advisory comment aimed at helping you avoid legal challenge. But if you have a more marginal project, DCA is not digging into the weeds to make that determination. That's just not our role. Just because we approve the financial details and confirm that required bits of information are being provided doesn't mean that you're not going to be sued by a developer. As soon as my fiscal year ends, my finance director gives me the numbers for the financial report in my annual CIE update. But my starting balance didn't match last year's ending balance. What did we do wrong? So in that case, at some point, somebody probably used unaudited numbers and they subsequently changed. DIFA absolutely requires that annual CIE updates be prepared using audited figures. And if you're having difficulty getting the annual update done between the end of your fiscal year and your annual DCA reporting deadline, because your audit takes too long, then reach out to us about shifting your annual deadline and we will try to help you with that. Some guy says he paid a bunch of money and impact fees to have a park built like 10 years ago and it still hasn't been built. He wants his impact fees back, so I told him to take a hike. That's cool, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. The local government must keep highly detailed records. Within 6 years of their collection, collected fees must be either expended or encumbered for the projects in which the service area for which they were collected. Otherwise, they are refundable. And lastly, our finance director used to be a stockbroker and she wants to invest our impact fees in a brokerage account until they're expended. What if the market tanks? Isn't that a problem? Well, yes, that is a problem. DIFA does require funds to be held in one or more interest-bearing accounts until they are expended. DCA does not believe, however, that a financial tool that has the potential to lose value meets the definition of an interest-bearing account. Just think about the previous question. You can't very well refund fees when projects don't get built if you've lost the money on poor investments. We'd recommend a vehicle like CDs or simple savings accounts. And also remember that these funds should not be mingled with other revenue streams such as enterprise funds or general funds prior to expenditure. Next, please. And that is all I have this morning. Thank you all so much for your attention, and I hope something in this presentation was helpful to everyone today.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you so much. We have just a minute or so, and I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions they wanted to pop in the Q&A, or if they wanted to go ahead and raise their hand. We do have a minute for that. Andrew popped in some really good information in the chat as well for you all, indicating that if those improvements are funded by impact fees in whole or in part. So make sure you're aware of that. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. We're going to go ahead and move on to Andrew Smith with the Atlanta Regional Commission and Allison Stewart Harris with VBH. And take it away. VHB, sorry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Allison Stewart Harris. I am the Community Planning Manager for VHB's Atlanta office. Joined this morning by your very own Andrew Smith from ARC, Principal Planner and Community Development. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about comprehensive plans. And I know some of you out there are like, oh man, more comprehensive plan stuff. I know this already. But what we really want to focus on today is talk about these 3 big things that you can do in your next update to really make your plan great. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. And like I said, I'm Allison Stewart Harris. I'm here with Andrew Smith. We have shared some of our planning pet peeves that you can take a quick look at, but we can go ahead and skip the next one, Polly. All right, so these 3 big things that we want to talk about today. The first one is right sizing, which Andrew's going to talk a little bit about, and then we're also going to talk about streamlining and alignment. Next. Now, before we get into that, though, Andrew is going to provide a little bit of background material just to kind of get everyone at the same starting point. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Allison. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you, Julie. That was a good overview, and I think hopefully some of those dots will be connected to some dots in this presentation, and then maybe some impact fee dots will be connected to Bill's presentation after this. But I think that was a great intro, so thanks. Again, the Regional Commission, ARC is just one of many in Georgia. Our job before about 2012 was really just to coordinate the regional and state reviews of comp plans. That was our role. We would offer, advice and guidance and assistance in sort of thinking through comp plan questions and issues, but our real role was kind of as a conduit between the local and DCA. Back then, major plan updates were due every 10 years. Julie was mentioning kind of that was the original intent of alignment between CIEs and comp plans. So that was, 10 years was the standard duration between required updates. And there was a very minor update required at the 5-year mark. But I think, there was always a little bit of pushback that grew over time in terms of the minimum standards kind of being a little too focused on data that would become outdated pretty quickly within a couple of years after the plan being published. They kind of had sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. I think I can agree with that criticism of the previous version of the rules. We have communities, even in the Atlanta region, that are just dramatically different sizes and have very different needs. There was sort of a triplicate deliverable requirement. So you had to do a data assessment. You had to do, sort of the document in the middle that detailed needs and opportunities and goals, and then, more of an action plan at the end. And it was just kind of a long process, kind of could be challenging or costly especially for smaller communities. So there was a lot of pushback that went all the way up to the General Assembly. To kind of kill the requirements for planning. That was luckily, for our sake, at least, vetoed by Governor Nathan Deal. But the compromise that was struck was that there was a big group of stakeholders in planning at state, regional, local levels that went back and took another hard look at the local planning requirements. And there was a big revision process. So going forward from that, the regional commission's role really changed quite dramatically. We have since 2012, 2013, when they were really implemented, been responsible for providing direct technical assistance to local governments to develop their comprehensive plan updates. This is very different than our role before that. I'll skip down to the bottom here. The minimum standards, the way that they were changed, kind of really emphasizes flexibility, customization, kind of legibility by the layperson, and usefulness to the elected officials and the leadership and the staff. The required elements were cut down to kind of a key core group of elements, and then there's sort of a menu of optional elements. There's just one deliverable now, which is a lot simpler for most communities. And there are options for smaller communities to very, very small communities to just totally opt out of many of the planning requirements. We don't have a lot of those size communities in the Metro Atlanta region, but there are communities in the state that might have 50 people or something like that, and that's a very different need there. Going back up, the compromise that was struck because the rules were made a lot more flexible. The compromise was that instead of doing a major update every 10 years with that very minor update in between, now you have to do an update every 5 years, and sort of an update is an update is an update. It just, forever. At least that's the way that it was set up. So you just have to do it more often. Next slide. So again, I wanted to show this slide just to really emphasize that when you dig into the DCA rules, after you have done your first plan your first plan really under the current rules framework, which I think every community in the Atlanta region has done. So what I mean is you've done at least one plan since the rules were changed in 2012. So every update you do after that is going to line up with this current framework. And so every update you do after that is essentially, really only required to focus on a handful of things. Almost all of the elements in the rules, plan elements, indicate that they are to be updated at the local government's discretion. So the really critical ones for your updates are these that you see in front of you. These are the ones that have to be updated every 5 years. It doesn't mean you have to completely reinvent the wheel. It doesn't mean you have to overhaul it. Just means you have to take a fresh, hard look at each of these key areas. And those are needs and opportunities. And I think those are interesting because those are often, things that are drivers of change within the plan. Those are things that can fluctuate a lot in a 5-year period. You may have a lot of annexation or something like that in the last few years. And so you have a lot of new needs based on new population, trying to manage code enforcement or manage, different situations from that. So that's one of the key elements. The other key element is land use. Oftentimes, your plan, you can amend your plan for very minor land use changes as you go over the years. But the 5-year update, you're supposed to, take a good look at your land use element, try to understand it. Is it meeting your needs? Is it meeting your goals? Is it supporting your zoning in the right way? The report of accomplishments, that just simply details every single item in your previous community work program to update DCA and everybody else on the status of items. The updated work program is just whatever comes out of that, whatever is left to be done, but is still a priority for the community. Anything that just hasn't been started, but it's going to be, and then anything brand new that comes out of your most recent planning process. Broadband, that was not a required element until 2018, but that's required to be updated every 5 years. And that's just part of an overall push by the state to elevate the importance of broadband throughout all kinds of different sets of state rules and state procedures and policies, because we're trying to sort of, close the gap in internet access for competitiveness and that sort of thing. Next slide. So I mentioned all that to get folks thinking about what you really have to do and what you really want to do when it comes time to start thinking about your next plan update. And one of the key priorities that Allison and I have kicked around and put into this presentation is the idea of needing to right size your plan to fit your community's needs. Next slide. Two big questions that go into this are, pretty simple. How much planning are you really aiming to do? And who's going to be doing it? And I know those can seem very simple, but you really need to think hard about those and think strategically about those, a year and a half before you get up to your next planning deadline. Next slide. So to the question of how much planning, as I mentioned, there's really just a handful of core plan elements that are truly required to be updated every 5 years, and everything else is at the local's discretion. And then many other elements are just purely optional to begin with. But our recommendations shown here on this slide are really for small communities with populations less than 20,000. You should be taking a look at land use. I mean, you have to by the DCA rules, but that's a key. Are so closely connected and influence each other, and every community faces some kind of issues with land use and transportation. Every community in the Metro Atlanta region, for example, I think has zoning, so you have to do a land use element. I think every community in the Metro Atlanta region as well, you're part of the MPO, so you have to do a transportation element of some sort. That doesn't mean you need to write the Great American Novel on it, but you need to pull in relevant items from your the RTP, from any GDOT or state level plans that impact your community, and then all of your local transportation thinking. And I think if you're in the Atlanta region, you really do need to take a look at housing and think about your housing goals and how you're accommodating people in your community and what you can do to make that a priority for your community if you're in our region here. Medium-sized communities, you need to be doing all of these things. There's an argument that, you may be a community outside the Atlanta region and you just don't have as much of a housing affordability need. That varies a lot, but if you're in the Atlanta region, you should be taking a look at housing for sure, like I just mentioned. So all 5 of those things: land use, economic development, transportation, housing, and quality of life. And then large communities over 50,000 population, no matter where you are in the state, our view is that you should be thinking about all of these areas. And then as the asterisk at the bottom mentions, to all the optional elements, natural resources, arts and culture, all those things I think are important. And many, if not most, of our communities in Metro Atlanta tackle those in their plans as well. So large communities, no matter where you are, our view is that you should be looking at all of those areas. Next slide. And so a key thing to think about is, again, this is kind of that second question, who's going to be doing it? There are really three options. If you have a fourth option, put it in the chat because I'd love to hear what it is. But option number one is you can use your regional commission. Like I mentioned, after 2012, we are, if you ask the regional commission for help on your plan, we have to say yes, and we happily say yes. That's one of our key, work program items for our staff. You can also just use your internal staff. And then option number three is to hire a consultant. I know that consultants used to be kind of just a no-brainer for communities if they really felt like the three-part submission was just really complicated and the expense was going to be such that they might as well just take those dollars and use them for a consultant anyway. But I think to explore all three of these options depending on certain factors that we're going to get into in just a second. So next slide. So, the big takeaway here, in terms of thinking about a regional commission versus in-house versus consultant, there's pros and cons, of course. And we really recommend that you think, strategically and early about your goals before picking an approach. Remember that the DC requirements are just a baseline. You have those core required elements. You have a menu of optional elements to choose from. Just because they're optional doesn't mean that you don't have a good reason for exploring them. And really, how do you anticipate using your plan? That's a big thing. Is this really for elected officials? Is it really for the community as a whole? Is it really for the layperson? Is it really kind of a staff level management document for how you want to prioritize? Think about that if you haven't in a while. Are there any gaps in your community's planning that could be addressed through the process? You may have issues that weren't existing in your community 5 years ago, and now they are. And is there a way to use the plan update process to address some of those or start a dialogue about some of those? Think about that. Do you want to completely overhaul a key element like land use? If you do, then I'm going to tell you what to do in just a second. But if you really want to start from scratch, you may have a holdover land use plan that was from the origins are really in the 90s or and you just tweaked it over the years whenever you've had your plan come due. Think about that. Do you really anticipate significantly changing your vision or your goals, or kind of tweaking them and probably reaffirming them to a large degree? What has really changed in your community? Have you experienced a lot of annexation? Is there a lot of development? Has there been a lot of change in leadership? Has there been an economic decline that's noticeable? Has there been a population decline? Is there stagnation that's happening? That's the opposite of change, I guess, but it can be a very, a negative development that you want to try to take care of in your plan. So think about positive and negative change. And then what are your resources? This is a no-brainer, of course, but think about your budget, think about your staffing. I'll say on this point that, that one of the key parts of the intent of having regional commissions available to help on comprehensive plans was to be able to serve as a staff extension, especially to under-resourced communities and smaller communities that many times just don't have planning staff at all. And that is where we've been able to step in and I think be a big boost to a lot of communities in the metro region. And I think that same is true of regional commissions statewide. Next slide. So our recommendation is that you explore kind of a minor or what we call a light update in the following circumstances. If you're at the 5-year mark after what you would consider a major update. So for example, you did your first plan under the quote unquote new DCA rules, let's say in 2017, 2022 is your next due date. We would recommend exploring a light update in that circumstance, especially if there's not been a lot of change or development in the past 5 years, or if you have not had a lot of elected official or community leadership turnover in the last 5 years. Of course, if there are other needs that override those, think about that too. And in terms of who's doing it for larger communities, I think that doing a light update is attainable with using in-house resources. Some examples recently of this would be Alpharetta and Cobb County in our region here. Medium-sized and smaller communities, this is one of the key places where you can lean on the RC for assistance if you need it. When you're exploring kind of a light update, we've worked with Lithonia last year and Pine Lake this year. Those are two small communities in our region that I think we've been a positive assist for. Next slide. And then I'm wrapping up my portion here. Our recommendation again, this is what we said during the GPA conference, is that you explore a more major update or a full update in the following conditions. And again, this is you're going to end up probably doing more than just those required things that are in the DCA rules. But if it's been 10 years since your last, what you would consider your last kind of major update of your plan, you should really explore a full update. For example, if you did 2013, right after the rules were changed, you did your first new DCA, new plan under the new DCA rules. 2018, you kind of did a light update there. It had only been 5 years. Let's say 2023, that's your next due date coming up. That's when we would recommend taking a hard 10-year look on doing a more major update because it's been 10 years. And especially some of these amplifying factors here, if there's been a lot of change, a lot of development or growth in the last 5 years, a lot of turnover or shifts in policy direction in terms of your leadership, or if you have a lot of problems with your plan and you find yourself, frustrated with it, or, almost maybe a worse problem, not using it at all. If you have the same kinds of zoning issues and variances that come up, that means that, yeah, you should probably take a hard look at your zoning, but you should probably take a look at your plan as well, if you're experiencing those issues over and over again. And for this kind of thing, this is where I and we recommend that you look to hire a consultant. Think about your budget. Think about how you can unify resources that you didn't know you had. Explore whatever you can do creatively to think about hiring a consultant for this level of an update. Next slide. I think we're jumping over into Allison's section, and this is one of my favorite slides.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, just a word of caution when you're thinking about your updates. I like to think of comprehensive plans as sort of like closets. When you first move into a house and you're unpacking, your closet looks great, but over time you're kind of shoving stuff in there, you're in a hurry. And, if you don't ever really take the time to clean it out and go through it, it can get really disorganized and ultimately unusable. So when you're thinking about, do I just need a light update or a full overhaul, try to think of what your comprehensive plan closet looks like. Next slide. So I want to just do one quick background thing before we jump into our next two tips. For the past 25 years, I've really been looking for a way to use my high school chemistry class. And I think I finally found the way to do this. So y'all probably recognize this as the periodic table of the elements. And when you think of comprehensive plans and everything that can go into it, it's a lot like a periodic table. Next slide. So for our table as planners, it's a little less complicated, but these are all the things that you can have in your comprehensive plan. And like the periodic table, those elements at the top are really the most important ones to be focused on. Next. So I really want to just take a couple of minutes talking about goals and policies, needs and opportunities, and work program items. Next. So for goals and policies, these are just very long-term. This is your consistent foundation for planning. They should really address the breadth of planning topics in your community. It's high level, general direction that states a general position. And I think in this case, squishy words are totally okay. You want to give yourself some flexibility. There's a lot of conversation. Well, is that a goal or a policy or objective? Honestly, I don't think it matters that much. As long as you're providing clear guidance, it's good. Next. The second big element, go back one please, thanks, is needs and opportunities. Like Andrew mentioned, the needs and opportunities are really what's happening right now in your community. This is the part of your comprehensive plan that's probably going to change the most from update to update. And it's a really great place to start when you begin your update process and focusing on what's changed. I'd also say this is probably one of the most meaningful places for public input. One of the things that I've found in doing a number of comprehensive plans is that it's really good to get other departments involved in this stage so that you're documenting the needs and issues that they're facing. Not all of those are readily visible to the community. Next slide. And finally, that third main element of the work program. Again, this is just that list of projects and initiatives for the next 5 years. You have to designate your time frame, your funding, the responsible party. This is not a place for the squishy words. This is really a place for the active verbs that you need to use. One suggestion that we have too in this is really looking at a 2-tiered work program. Like a lot of comprehensive transportation plans, you have that short-term 5-year plan, and then everything else that you want to do, but you're probably not going to get to anytime soon. Putting that in a separate kind of long-term work program could be helpful. Next. So, like certain elements bond together, all of these items are bonded together in a specific way. Again, your goals and your policies form this major framework for your planning. You got your needs and your opportunities, and it's really those work program items that bind those two together. So it's how you answer your needs and opportunities to meet your goals and policies. This will come back later in the presentation. Next. So that background information aside, I want to talk about one of the big recommendations we have is to really try to streamline your comprehensive planning documents. Next slide. I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that there's a big difference between documenting and distilling. There's a lot of comprehensive plans out there that just kind of they document everything from the, and that's great, and we need to do that. But I think we as planners, it's our responsibility to sort of take it to that next level and say, okay, let's take a look at these things, let's prioritize, let's focus, and let's really identify those key needs and opportunities. Let's really figure out what these real work program items are and make our plans a lot more succinct and easier to use. Next. And again, a collection of documents and lists might be comprehensive, but it's just not a plan. Next slide. I want to share a couple of streamlining tips for our 3 main elements. Starting with goals and policies, I really want to encourage everyone to review your previous plan goals and policies with a critical eye. I think when we're doing updates, we have this tendency to be like, oh, okay, yeah, these are all fine. We'll just add a few here and there. But really, take a look at each goal policy and ask, is this still relevant? If you look at a lot of comp plans, there's a lot of duplicates, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of conflicts. This is a really good time to kind of weed those out and streamline them. It's also a good opportunity to look for gaps. Are there any topics that you really haven't addressed yet in your goals and policies? And this would be a good time to add them. And want to discourage you from just assuming that your previous plans, goals, and policies are all comprehensive, consistent, and relevant today. Next. Another tip is to really try to stick to one topic per goal or policy. So an example of what I would say is a good goal or policy is encourage the development of workforce housing. It's simple, direct, one topic. What we often see is a lot of goals and policies kind of squish a lot of things in there. So encourage workforce housing, senior housing, protection of single family neighborhoods, and walkability. Really try to challenge yourself to get down to that single topic in each of these. Next. You do want to keep your goals and policies general, but not so general that it has no meaning. So this is sort of like a Goldilocks rule. So I would say it's too general to say support innovation, but it's too specific to say, partner with Gwinnett County to create an innovation center northwest of downtown. You want to find that middle ground. So something like support the development of innovation centers. Next. For your needs and opportunities, this kind of goes back to that distillation slide of, it's good to list all the needs and opportunities that come out in the process, but really try to make those priorities clear. So we would recommend identifying the top 3 to 5 high-level needs and opportunities that really consistently bubble up throughout your planning process, and try to avoid that massive disorganized list of everything that you've heard in the process. Next. I would also recommend that you state your needs and opportunities as clear, complete thoughts, especially if you do this in sort of a bulleted form. And this is probably maybe just a pet peeve of mine, but so for example, say, need more diverse retail options downtown, that's a complete thought. Whereas if you just say retail, that could be interpreted in so many different ways. So really try to yourself to make each of these thoughts succinct and complete. Next. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about some streamlining tips for the work program. I think this is an area where we could really do a lot of improvement on a lot of our plans and really think about our work program with a lot of intention. So some guidelines for what to include in the work program, if it represents a significant investment of money or staff time, if it has a definable start and finish, projects that are community facing, so not like buy a fax machine for the office. That's a terrible example. Who's buying fax machines anymore? But anyway, maybe buying a computer program, that wouldn't really be something you would put in there. And what will really see action in the next 5 years. And then you want to think twice about including some of the following items. Something that represents a very minor investment is probably not worth putting in the work program. If there's something that has no viable funding source and kind of no plan of action attached to it, maybe consider putting that in your long-term items. If there's no definable start and finish, I see a lot of items in work programs that are like, attend this committee meeting. And I would say you probably don't really need to put that in your work program. That's more of a day-to-day regular task. And again, those items that are more internal facing, that are more about the administration of your department, you probably don't need to put this in the work program. Next. And this is actually John West, who's a fellow panelist here today. This is something that we had talked about with John last year, as really using your report of accomplishments as a learning tool. Taking a look at that early in your process and saying, hey, look, all right, these were the things we said we were going to do. What didn't get done and why did we get stuck? And also it's a good time to remove some of those items that actually maybe weren't work program items, more goals and policies. It's just a good time to kind of clean those items up. I think what sometimes happens is we get halfway through or mostly done with the comprehensive plan process. And it's like, oh gosh, we didn't look at the report of accomplishments yet. Let's do this now. So really try to get that early in the process and use that as a way to start thinking about some of the issues that you might want to address. Next slide. All right, the next thing and final tip is what we're going to call alignment. Next slide. You can skip over this one too. Thank you. So if you remember that little, the bonding diagram again, so your goals and policies are sort of your foundation. You got your needs and opportunities, and the work program items bond those together. So this is the ideal, and this is what we think we're doing as planners. But when you actually look at our comprehensive plans, they look more like this. Next slide. They're kind of all over the place. If you really kind of go into these in some plans and map them, you got needs and opportunities that aren't connected to goals. You got work program items that aren't connected to anything. It's a lot going on, and we're not always doing a great job connecting these things together. Next slide. So the big message I want to get across here is really try to avoid the sort of orphaned items that aren't connected to other items in your work. In your comprehensive plan. So for example, if you have a need or opportunity, got a goal or policy, might be time to write a policy. If you have a need or opportunity and it doesn't have a corresponding work program item, if this is really a high priority need, figure out a first step for your work program. And if it's not a priority, it might be okay. Next slide. If you have a work program item without a goal or policy, again, it might just be time to write some more policy. I think where this gets really tricky is when you have a work program item that is actually not answering a need or opportunity that you're documenting in your plan. This is very tricky, and it's also really common. The path of least resistance is, okay, well, we'll just kind of sneak in like a need or an opportunity. There's a connection. But the best practice is really to kind of evaluate that work program item and see if it's the best use of limited time and resources for your community. Next slide. There's a lot of common pitfalls in trying to align your different elements of your comprehensive plan. Again, that biggest gulf is typically between your needs and opportunities and your work program. I think one of the things that also happens is we often treat the needs and opportunities, goals and policies and work programs as separate tasks, and really trying to get those things integrated and do them in tandem with one another. There is also some flip-flopping that happens where your work programs are actually more like goals or policies, and that's more semantics, and that's an easy thing to fix. Next slide. So you might be thinking, gosh, like, is this really an issue? This seems really basic. I mean, we're planners, we're organized people, we do this, but it actually is an issue. At VHB, we've actually done a study of 50 Atlanta area comp plans. We use this thing called our comps tool, which looks at a sort of a macro look across the region for different planning and policy trends, but it also helps us look at a single plan's content and how well it's aligned. Next slide. So these are the 50 cities that we have studied, a really interesting range of communities from 185 people to almost 1 million. And throughout that, we've looked at really over almost 9,000 pieces of information in these comprehensive plans. Next slide. And what we do is we extract out each need, opportunity, goal, policy, work program item, and we code it with a specific topic. So these are the 29 different topic areas that something could get coded as. And then when we do all this and we look at the alignment, the results are really interesting. Next slide, please. This is a really ugly chart, and I know you can't read it, but you don't necessarily need to read it. You just need to kind of see the color. What this is, every line represents a comprehensive plan for the Atlanta area. Top are these 29 topic areas. So what these colors means is every time you see red, that is an instance where a topic has something that's totally not aligned with something else. So there's a work program item that is unconnected or disconnected to a need or opportunity or goal or policy. And what this is telling us, there are a significant amount of plans out there that are actually lacking alignment in these basic categories. So the more green you see, the better. And if you go to the next slide, please. So what we found was that about 48 out of these 50 plans actually had at least one topic with what we would call orphan content. And the average number was about 4 topics with orphans. As a region, we do actually really well in that other category, which is actually, the content that's not required, like natural resources, cultural resources. And a lot of our plans are pretty quiet on housing. So, we do have some work to do as planners in making our comprehensive plans more streamlined and more aligned. But I think, just doing a couple of tweaks here and there throughout our process will really help us get to some great planning. Next slide. This is our wrap up. So again, just to close out, next slide. As you are thinking about your next planning update for your comp plan, we would really encourage you to right size, think about what you need to plan and who should be doing it, how you can streamline your content. Also, just really paying attention to how all your content's aligning with one another. And with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either Andrew or myself.
Thank you so much, Allison and Andrew. I saw this presentation at GPA and loved it so much, and I loved it just as much this time, and I learned something new every time I hear it. So hopefully I'll hear it another time in the future. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here today. I hope everyone enjoyed that. We did have 2 questions in the chat, but those have been answered. So everyone, you can see those responses if you go up to that Q&A, up or down to your Q&A function. All right, so let's move on to, and I've got some things coming in the chat from ARC, just letting you know about our Metro Atlanta housing tool. So make sure you check that out. But we're going to move on to impact fees. And with us today is Bill Ross, the walking encyclopedia of impact fees. So I'm going to let him share his screen and take it away. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. We still got John West on this one. But at any rate, couple of comments before I start. One of them is the impact fee law itself was the result of a committee that was composed of city and county professional planners, the 2 organizations that represent cities and counties in Georgia, the ACCG and GMA, and developers. And it was quite a committee and a lot of discussion. One of the things that came out of that, well, I'll admit, I'm the guy, I invented the whole idea of a CIE. There wasn't no CIE out there. But what's not very well known is it was the developers who demanded some way to know where's their money going, what's going on. I'm paying a fee. Is my money going to pay for the elected officials to go have a vacation to Jamaica? So the CIE was created to address developers' concerns of what are you going to do with my money? When are you going to do it? What's the basis for this fee, so that everybody could know what it was going to be. And as you all have seen, the CIEs have really become very, very useful, and they were a great idea. But it wasn't the planners who came up with it. It was these developers wanting to know, where's my money going? And that also, of course, there's the annual audit requirement in the law. Again, any audit would have isolated impact fees anyway, but we put that in there again for the developers to know. They could go to the audit and see what was collected, where to go, and all of that kind of thing. One comment on refunds. The question came up about, if you don't spend the money in 6 years, you're going to have to refund it to the people who paid it. Well, no, you don't. If you mind your T's and Q's. The impact fee law has an unusual definition of the term encumber. Under normal circumstances, your finance director or any accountant will tell you you encumber money to cover an obligation that has been adopted, a contract, a lease purchase agreement. Something has been approved by the government to spend money in the future, and it's like a contractual obligation. Then you can encumber money and save it up, so you'll have the money to pay off that contract when you get to the end. Well, the impact fee law goes one step farther than that, and that is that well, here I'm gonna read you the definition. Right out of the law, it means to legally obligate by contract, which is the normal situation, or otherwise commit to use by appropriation or other official act of a municipality or county. Adopting that annual update report is an official act. So you should be encumbering all of the money sitting in the bank at the end of the last audit. Encumber that to projects right then and there. You can move it around, because in fact, most of those projects don't have contracts. Sometimes they do. So from year to year, your priorities might change. You might move an encumbrance from one project to another. Once you do have a contract, it's very good to encumber money for that. But at any rate, that's a loosey-goosey kind of thing. You can just adopt that annual update report showing what you're encumbering the money for, and you're golden. You will never have to pay a refund in that case. And I think that's all the comments I was going to have. Let me pull up my guy here and do the slideshow. Okay. Well, my version has John West on here too. John's in the audience. He can pipe in at any time. Feel free, John. Okay. Now this is
Bill, before you get started, we are not seeing your screen.
You're not seeing my screen.
We are not.
Oh, you know why? I didn't.
You have two screens.
Yes, let me go back. Let me get rid of this. What I didn't do is share it. In show. There we go. Okay. And I can't get out of this. Okay, here we go. Technically challenged. Okay. Here we go. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Well, Molly, you have a copy. You want to go ahead and just pull that up on your,
Yeah, let's go.
yeah,
Let's see, here we go.
fiddling around with technological issues here. Okay, that looks familiar. Most, if not at least many of you have impact fees in place in your cities or counties. Vast majority of impact fee cities and counties are in fact in or at least around the Atlanta region. There are a few outliers down on the coast in South Georgia, but most of them are right up here. Many of you were there when your community first adopted impact fees, and you know all about this stuff. Others have, you know, been hired in cities and counties, and there's an impact fee program, and that's what you know. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the nuts and bolts about this whole thing. Give me another slide, Molly. So why do you even have impact fees? The idea is that you want to be sure that new growth and development pays their fair proportionate share of the cost of public facilities that will be needed to serve them. As a community grows, you need more fire stations. Well, if you didn't grow at all, you never had another house built, you probably wouldn't need that new fire station. So new growth creates the demand for public facilities. Right now, the taxpayers today are going to be paying for that fire station, even though it's being needed to serve new growth. Go ahead, Molly. So the idea is sort of level the playing field. Taxes can be just arbitrary. There's no connection between the payment and the services received. You got to pay your school taxes, whether you got kids in school, no kids in school, 12 kids in school, it doesn't matter. Your taxes are the same, but fees actually give you a direct connection between the payment and services, generally called the rational nexus. Somebody comes in, they want a building permit. There's a fee for the building permit that actually relates to the size of the house, for instance, how many plumbing facilities, how many electrical facilities, unless you've adopted the general schedule. But it's to recompense the city or county for the time and expense of going out and issuing the project, inspecting the building, doing a CO, etc. In other words, there's a connection between the fee being charged and the service being rendered, and that's the same idea behind impact fees. People pay for the facilities required to meet their demand. Otherwise, the tax base is going to pay for the majority of these, as I mentioned. Next slide. This is a wild example, but I just said, okay, new growth in the tax base value. This chart, golly, I did it an awful long time ago. This shows that the existing tax base stays the same year to year to year. That's the existing development today, continues to be the existing development. But as new development comes online, of course, they start paying their property taxes. The problem is the first year, very little development as projected out for 20 years, very little development. They pay very little in the way of impact property taxes. As the years go by, more and more development, the community gets property taxes more and more from new development. So in this example, the future was that development would actually there'd be more new development even than existing development. But the long and the short of it is that they don't pay their fair share. The vast majority of the taxes collected to build those new facilities come from the existing tax base. not from new development. It builds slowly over time. Next slide. So question has come up. If I adopt impact fees, is that going to slam my community, or are the developers just going to move on and go somewhere else? There's no evidence to support that ever happens for several reasons. But many of you know Dr. Chris Nelson. He used to be here at Georgia Tech years ago, and I think he's out in Arizona now. But he did a lot of impact fee studies, mostly in Florida. But he found, and in Florida, it's not unusual to have an impact fee on a single family house of $20,000, $25,000. So they make Georgia look like pikers. But he found no relationship between these fees, the sudden introduction of impact fees and continuing with impact fees, compared to communities that didn't have impact fees. And that, bottom line, guys, it's the market. If somebody wants to buy a $1.2 million house in Milton, they're going to buy a $1.2 million house in Milton. They're not going to say, well, where else can I find this house? There was also a Georgia Tech study done that looked specifically at, I can't remember the community. It may have been Canton. I don't know. And the author of that study tracked the number of building permits issued each month in this particular community. And as you can suspect from the chart, this community adopted impact fees in April of this year. So what he found, not only in this community, but looking at other communities around the state, around mostly the Atlanta area, the developers know that the impact fees are coming. There's a CIE out there that's been adopted. There's a study that's been done. So there was an advisory committee if it was a new community. So they go in and they buy a whole lot of extra building permits the month before. And that's that spike in March you see on this thing. So in April, big drop in the number of permits issued because they pre-bought a whole bunch of them. Of course, technically those building permits are only good for 6 months. Now, most ordinances say you can renew for another 6-month period. Quite often in impact fee ordinances, we write in there that you're held harmless if you've already got a permit, but you can't renew it. So at any rate, as you can see, we start building back up as they use up the permits that have already been issued. They're coming in for new construction, and if we had another year on here, that'd be totally back to normal, and in some cases increasing to the extent that new growth is building in this community. So there's just no truth to this theory that it's going to kill development. There's a second element here. When the city or county government, city council, county commission debates how much are we going to charge in impact fees, what's the number one thing on their minds? Will this kill development? Number one. They may not say it, but that's what they're thinking. And generally, they seek an impact fee that they feel comfortable will not negatively impact development. Some communities have adopted their impact fees at the maximum they possibly could. Others have adopted their fees at 50%, 100, 20, well, not 20%, but at any rate, at much lower issues, because they're thinking about what's the competition. If my county is sitting right here, we're looking at impact fees, and we're afraid we're going to drive development just over the county line to our neighbor, because those people work in the same place as our people work, commuting to work or whatever. It's part of the decision-making process. So you're kind of cured, if you will, right up front through those contemplations. Next slide. So these are the basic things that the impact fee law covers. We're going to talk a little bit also about development exactions while we're at it. service areas, and of course that comprehensive plan connection, the CIE. So the next slide. The law defines the term development exactions. We're back to that exactions, okay? And it's any requirement that compels the payment, dedication, or contribution of goods, services, land, or money as a condition of approval. And that approval is anything including zoning approvals. Well, here the next part goes on. It includes zoning, special uses, variances, site plans, preliminary subdivisions, etc., and building permits. Anything that requires the payment of money of any kind of money comes under that requirement. Molly, you said 1 minute.
Yeah, sorry, we've got one more speaker after you, and we're almost at 10:15
Okay.
here.
Okay, I'll talk faster. Okay, the next one. It's because of this requirement in the law. Go ahead, Will. That the impact fee law applies to every city and county in this state. Every city and county, whether you adopt impact fees or not, that prohibition about exactions applies to everybody. One more. So within the act, they only list specific public facilities that you can charge impact fees for. The first thing you notice that's missing is schools. That's because 30 years ago, the Constitution said you could only use property taxes to fund schools. That's all changed now, but they've never put them in. Waste management's not on the list. I have no idea why waste management was left off. Next slide. So the law separates project improvements from system improvements. A project improvement is anything that serves just that development. The streets in a subdivision and the sidewalks in a subdivision, a deceleration lane for a shopping center. These are improvements that specifically serve the project. And they are exempt from impact fees, if you will. You can continue to charge them because they serve just that development. It's the system improvements that you can charge impact fees for. And these are things that provide service to the community at large, or at least a much larger portion of the community than just a particular development. Next. So my little chart here, project improvements over there, local subdivision, street, et cetera, you can continue to require those through your development regulations or whatever. System improvements serve the whole community or most of it. Land for a school, a new county courthouse, but those aren't impact fee eligible. It's only the ones on that list. In this case, a library and recreation facilities, but the things on that list are the only things you can charge impact fees for. One more. Also an important thing when we talk about system improvements is capital improvements. There's a limitation on these also. Next. These capital improvements you can charge impact fees for have to have a life of 10 years or more. This is way more than accountants usually apply. Computers, for instance, have a useful life of five years. I think we're all working on older computers than that. But at any rate, if it doesn't last 10 years, you cannot use impact fees to finance them. Next. So the level of service is critical to figuring out impact fees. What's the relationship between the service and the demand? Park acreage per household is an example. Number of fire trucks per population. These establish the level of service, and this is trying to get at how much of an improvement needs to be paid for by the existing folks, and how much for the new folks. You can increase your current level of services to higher level, but that has to be met by the existing folks too. You can decrease your level of service That creates excess capacity in your existing facilities that can handle new development up to a point. Next. So there's lots of ways to lower impact fees. One of them is just reduce the impact fee schedule, charge less than you could. That's a common way to do it. But the law includes individual fee assessments. You know, my use isn't on the list. I'm different. Individual appeals. People can appeal their impact fee for any reason under the sun. My grandmother needs an operation. I don't have the money. Whatever it is, they can appeal the impact fee. There are also provisions for developer agreements in which a community and the developer agree, okay, if you go ahead and build this system improvement, we will give you a break on the impact fees because you're giving us the land for a park or whatever. As part, you know, you're building a major road through your community that's actually on the transportation plan. That's what happened in Canton, for instance. There are also exemptions. Let's go to the next one. There are basically two kinds of exemptions. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Well, I'll just tell you, there's two kinds of exceptions that are allowed and provided for in the impact fee law. One is for extraordinary economic and employment growth. The other one is for affordable housing. And in those exemptions, the community can adopt criteria. You get to define what is extraordinary economic development. Is it one community said we needed more office buildings, so they came up with an exemption for that. There is, right today, there is only one community I know of that has an affordable housing exemption, and that's Sandy Springs. If in your condominium building, for instance, if you provide a certain percentage of those units as affordable, and the city defines what affordable is, you get a percentage off your impact fee. So far as I know, no one has ever applied for that exemption. When you're selling $1.2 million condos, who wants to put in 5% in affordable? They won't do it. It's not worth what they're saving from the impact fee. It's just not worth it. Next, please. So this is again kind of repeating what Julie was talking about. What the CIE does, needs, scheduled capital improvements and funding sources. Next one. So the DCA, as you heard from Julie, they adopt minimum standards for these capital improvement elements. And also it's the state regulations that require the annual updates, which is a good idea. And they publish guidelines. You can get various publications online from DCA if you want to look more into these. Next slide. And I was overjoyed to hear that DCA is thinking, you know, maybe it's time to update our 30-year-old guidelines on CIEs. Absolutely, they are way out of date and have been interpreted 14 ways to Sunday. So I really, I think I was on that committee that got suspended because of the pandemic. But
yes, you were.
Anyway, I was, John. I help any way I can, just with some practical experience. But I'm just one guy. So thank you very much, Molly. You can close all that up.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill. We appreciate you being here. As you may have noticed, we put a little message in the chat. We're going to extend our meeting today by 15 minutes. If you're able to hang around, please do. And we're going to jump right in with Greg and our DRI update. Greg, take it away.
Hey, thanks everyone. I'm Greg Jafrida. I manage plan reviews here in the Community Development Group for ARC. I also work on this with Andrew Smith, so you can really direct these questions to either one of us. We've got our contact information here. This will be some review for some of you, so I'm going to rip through these slides pretty quickly, try to save a little bit of time for questions at the end. And you can always reach out to us at any time with questions about DRIs. Next slide. I think everyone knows what ARC is, but this is just an overview of our county area. And next slide. So I put this slide in. A lot of folks don't realize that the DRI review, there are actually two parts of state law that require DRI reviews that are administered separately, kind of in parallel, but they are technically separate parts of the law. There is the ARC portion of the statewide DRI rule, and then there is the DRI rule that is review that is administered by Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. And that one is the one that requires a traffic study and has the potential to apply conditions for transportation impacts. Next slide. So we work together to administer this program to identify developments that may have impacts outside their local jurisdictions. The intent is really intergovernmental coordination. So we bring together surrounding jurisdictions, GDOT, any other state agencies, transit operators, community improvement districts to really talk about big projects before they're built. Next slide. Actually, if you can skip these next three, this is just some of the nuts and bolts of the state legislation that is behind the DRI law. And I just put that in there for reference, and you'll be able to see that in the slides when they're shared after this meeting. So really for the planning staff, for folks who haven't dealt with it before, you're often the first point of contact when a project comes in that may come close to the DRI thresholds. We'll get into those a little bit. But basically, when a project exceeds thresholds that are set by the Unified Growth Policy Map, that is a document that is generated by the ARC and I believe this committee, that sets different thresholds for the impacts of development based on where they are in the region. So the thresholds are a little lower in rural areas and a little higher in core areas, such as downtown, midtown, and Buckhead. They can just be large developments, or they can be unique, smaller developments that may have outsized impacts. All DRI reviews are triggered by a local action. So we don't do just speculative DRI reviews by a developer if they're just kicking the tires on something. It has to be accompanied with a local trigger action. This is often a rezoning, but it can be many different things. It could be a land disturbance permit, it could be a site plan review, special administrative permit, driveway permit. So just because a property is zoned, sometimes a developer will think that they bought the site fully entitled and it's ready to go, but that doesn't mean that they can necessarily get around a DRI review. Next slide. These are just some rough thresholds. These are kind of the medium thresholds. And so I recommend that you go to our website and take a look at the thresholds for your particular area. If you are in an outlying jurisdiction with a lot of undeveloped rural areas, your threshold may be lower, but usually about 500 units or 500,000 square feet. Next slide. These are some other unique uses that might trigger something. The expansion of wastewater treatment or waste handling facility, truck stops, prisons, schools, anything that might represent some sort of unique community use where there's a significant new project or an expansion. Next slide. This is a bit of a rough flow chart. Basically, the developer proposes a project. It's often the case where we have had a conversation with the developer or their engineer on the front end. They'll let us know that something's in the pipeline. They maybe before it has been submitted to the local government for review. Sometimes we learn about it from the local government. It can really go either way. But we encourage planning staff on the front end to always just be thinking about the thresholds and to reach out to us as early in the process as possible, just so we can get the meeting scheduled. We're happy to verify the determination of whether it's a DRI or not. If you're not sure, we encourage you to reach out and call so that there's no communication later on in the entitlement process. The local government requests the meeting with us to discuss the DRI, to discuss the methodology for the required traffic study. We convene that meeting, we bring all the different parties together. And then one of the big outcomes of that meeting is we agree on the methodology for the Greta traffic study. Next slide. So once that happens, basically the developer goes out and does the traffic study, they gather all the required information, and then they submit it to us for the formal review. We package it up, we put it out to the different parties, we gather comments, we do preliminary comments, and then a final report. Once both the ARC and Greta processes are done, then the local government is free to take final action, whether it's approval or denial. but they do have to wait until all of this is completed before taking that final action. The local government retains full control, approval denial control, but they have to wait until the process is completed before they do that, whether it's a permit process or whether it's a legislative process through your council. Next slide. Yeah, I think I got through most of that. Let's see. As far as, well, yeah, let's go next slide. Just a little bit, quick overview of what happened in 2020. We were kind of expecting a little bit of a slowdown from the pandemic. That did not happen. We reviewed more projects in 2020 than we did in 2019. You can kind of see it's a little bit cyclical with the economy, but we really just continued to be busy throughout the pandemic. It really did not stop for us at all. You can see, actually, next slide. Take a look at, actually, I'm sorry, go back one more time, Molly. Sorry about that. We had a really big jump in industrial square footage, 21 million square feet. I think a lot of you have probably seen that. There's just an enormous demand for distribution warehouse space. I think that's something that was already happening before the pandemic, but then it was just accelerated by the pandemic. Generally, commercial dropped off a little bit. Multifamily was already starting to drop off a bit well before the pandemic, and now I think it's kind of steadied out a little bit. I think that's more to do with kind of some macroeconomic conditions rather than specifically the pandemic. Next slide. During COVID, we had a lot of questions about how do you do a traffic study? And so Greta worked with the traffic engineers to allow traffic forecasting and to allow engineers to go gather traffic counts in the surrounding area in recent years, usually no older than maybe 2 to 3 years, and then apply a growth rate that has been agreed upon by the group in order to come up with those traffic estimates. We are still operating under that methodology right now. I think it's kind of an ongoing discussion with Greta and Georgia Department of Transportation and your local government departments of transportation and public works to take a look at the traffic data as we're coming out of the pandemic and what that looks like and whether we may be returning to a situation where we're going to do traditional traffic counts as we did them before. We have switched early in the pandemic, we switched all meetings to remote. I think we're still having a discussion on how to approach this. In my opinion, I think we should just keep doing remote meetings. Frankly, it's a lot more convenient for everyone. We recognize that it was a challenge for, our colleagues in Cherokee County to come down to downtown for a meeting for an hour and a half. And frankly, I think we've had really good success with the remote meetings. In my opinion, we should stick with remote meetings unless the local government would prefer to have it in person for some reason, and then we can discuss that. But we are going to stay remote definitely until ARC has moved back into fully opening its office, which I'm not sure exactly where that stands right now. Next slide. Okay, here's a little, I think this is the slide I was thinking of. I didn't know where it was. You can see that jump in square footage from 2019 to 2020. We had an 219% increase in industrial square footage, which is mostly distribution warehouse. We had a increase in commercial. The multifamily dropped, but I think that was unrelated to the pandemic. And then single family housing dropped in 2020, but I would expect to see that bounce back a little bit in 2021 as we start looking at those numbers. So I think we've had some questions about what kind of impacts has the pandemic had. I think it's going to be really hard to separate what specifically changed because of the pandemic compared to what was already happening in the economy and with development patterns anyway. We have seen anecdotally, we've seen a few projects that have reduced the amount of retail or the amount of office, which may be related to the pandemic because of uncertainty about being able to lease that product. Next slide. So far this year, we've done about 12 reviews that are either complete or in progress. We got another 6 lined up. I wouldn't be surprised to see us match the number for last year. Continued demand for warehouse and distribution. multifamilies holding steady, and talked about that reduction in commercial space. Next slide. Okay, so that's it. Happy to take any questions. I know we're about 3 minutes over here, but y'all just let me know. I don't see anything in the Q&A right now.
I do not either. Do we have anyone who would like to raise their hand and speak? Ask any questions, any comments? If not, we will let you go a little earlier than we thought. Thought we would be here till 10:45, but we know you all have busy schedules and busy days to get to. So thanks, Greg. Thank you for, we've got Stephen Arms raised his hand. So let's take one question from Stephen. And all right, you should be able to unmute yourself now, Stephen.
Okay. Yeah, I had an earlier question for Bill, I think it was, about the CID limits. Did you see that one?
Yeah, let's look at the chat. I did see that come through. If Bill is still with us, we've got a question about, Stephen said he's had instances where legal counsel advised against funding projects outside limits of CID where the project clearly improves the access to the CID and its competitiveness. What are your thoughts?
What the hell? There's a good example. Well, this is years ago, but there were road projects that impacted both Alpharetta and Johns Creek, for instance. Alpharetta had impact fees, Johns Creek didn't. Didn't make any difference as far as the shares of the money that needed to go into it. I'm not sure that's addressing the question, though.
Yeah, it was specifically the CID limits within a CID, not a impact fee. You started off by using a CID example, so it's really more of a CID question than an impact fee question.
Well, I was talking about the CIE, capital improvements element.
So it may be outside of your area of expertise. The community improvement.
Impact fees can be used in CIDs also. It's all about the law allows you to set up separate service areas. So a community could have a county-wide service area and then pull out a CID as a special area. There's a community right now that's about to come back and redo their impact fee, and there's a particular part of that city that they want to focus on. It's deteriorating badly while the rest of the community is doing just fine. So we're going to create a service area specifically for that area to look at an increase in public facilities to generate more development there compared to the rest of the city. And so you can have different service areas that actually have separate impact fee schedules. So a CID could easily be defined as a special service area and have its own, or none at all. They could, waive impact fees in a CID and charge them in the rest of the community. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill. All right, so I don't see any other chats, no other questions, and no hands raised. So we're going to let you all go. Did want to put a little plug in for our Regional Excellence Awards, previously known as the Development of Excellence Awards. Those applications opened on Tuesday of this week. It's a 6-week application period. So if you have any planning or development projects that you would like to nominate, please feel free to go onto our website. I will put a link in the follow-up email that I send to you all so you can get to that. If there's nothing else, have a great rest of your day, rest of your week, and I look forward to next month. Thank you all so much.